The Galactic Archive was a quiet place. Most people who worked there liked it that way. Rows of glowing data columns stretched up into the dark ceiling, each one holding thousands of years of laws, treaties, and records from 100 different worlds. It was not a place for excitement. It was a place for careful, slow work. Kieran Vex loved that kind of work. She was young for a researcher, only 26 years old in human terms, though her species measured age differently. She had pale blue skin and large, curious eyes, and she had spent the last 3 years studying galactic law. She was good at her job. She noticed things other people missed. That morning, she noticed something strange. She was reviewing access records for restricted zones across the galaxy. These were places that needed special permission to enter. Military bases, research labs, ancient vaults holding dangerous technology. Every species in the Galactic Council had rules about who could go where, and almost all of those rules were the same. You needed a permit. You needed a reason. You needed approval from someone in charge. Except in one case. Kieran stared at the screen, reading the same line 3 times to make sure she understood it correctly. Humans do not require authorization to enter restricted zones. She scrolled further. The same rule appeared again, and again, in every single restricted zone record she could find, no matter which species controlled it. No matter how old or new the site was, there was always the same strange exception written into the law. Humans could walk into any sealed area in the galaxy without asking anyone for permission. That made no sense. Every other species had strict rules. The Vornak had rules. The Solari had rules. Even the ancient Threll, who almost never left their home system anymore, had rules about who could enter their sacred structures. But humans, a species that had only joined galactic society a little over a century ago, had no such restriction anywhere. Kieran leaned back in her chair and thought about this. Humans were not the oldest species in the galaxy. They were not the most advanced in every field. They did not control the most territory. By almost every measure the Council used to rank importance, humans were still considered new, still considered small. So why did they get a privilege no one else had? She decided to ask someone. The Council building was not far from the archive, and she knew there was a human liaison who worked there most days. His name was Daniel Reyes. She had spoken with him a few times before, mostly about small administrative matters. He always seemed calm and easygoing, the kind of person who never seemed to be in a hurry. She found him in the main hall, drinking something warm from a cup and reading a report on a small screen. He looked up when she approached. "Kieran," he said, smiling. "What can I do for you?" "I have a question," she said, "about human access rights." His smile did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, just slightly. It was so small that Kieran almost missed it. "Go ahead," he said. "I was reviewing restricted zone laws," she said. "Every species has entry rules, except humans. Every single restricted area in the galaxy lists humans as an exception. No authorization required. I don't understand why. Humans are not the oldest species here. You're not the strongest, not by raw numbers. So why does this rule exist?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his cup, then back up at her. "That's a long story," he said. "I have time," Kieran said. He gave a short laugh, but it did not sound like he found anything funny. "It's not really mine to tell all of it, but I'll say this much. It wasn't given to us. We didn't ask for it either. It came from something that happened a long time ago. Something the Council decided on its own, after they saw what we could do, and more importantly, what we chose not to do." "What do you mean?" "I mean the rule isn't about power," Daniel said. "It's about trust, and trust like that isn't handed out for free. It's earned, usually the hard way." Kieran frowned. "Earned how?" Daniel set his cup down. "You want the real answer, you should talk to the older Council members, the ones who were around 80, 90 years ago. Ask them about the Kryvex incident. They'll remember it better than I could explain it. I wasn't even born yet when it happened." "The Kryvex incident," Kieran repeated, memorizing the name. "I've never heard of it. Most people your age haven't," Daniel said. "It's not exactly something the Council likes to bring up, but it's the reason for that rule you found. Every word of it." He picked his cup back up, signaling the conversation was over, at least for now. "Go talk to the old-timers," he said. "They'll tell you the truth of it better than I can. Just be ready. It's not a comfortable story." Kieran thanked him and left, her mind already racing. A century of law, all built around one incident she had never even heard of. She was a researcher. She could not let a mystery like this go unanswered. That night, she did not go home. She stayed in the archive, searching for any record of something called the Kryvex incident. Most of the results were locked behind old security clearances, ones that had not been touched in decades. But she found a name attached to several of the sealed files. A retired council member named Orlin Thass, who had served on the security committee at the time the records were sealed. She sent him a message the next morning, asking if she could speak with him. To her surprise, he agreed almost immediately. They met 3 days later, in a small, quiet garden on the upper levels of the council building. Orlin Thass was very old now. His once dark scales faded to a pale gray, his movements slow and careful. But his eyes were sharp, and when Kieran mentioned the Kryvex incident, those eyes narrowed with something that looked like old pain. "Why do you want to know about that?" he asked. "I found the human authorization law," Kieran said. "I want to understand where it came from." Orlin was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the garden. Finally he spoke. "It came from a mistake," he said. "Not a human mistake, ours. The Kryvex species made a decision almost 90 years ago that they believed was reasonable. It cost a great many lives, and it taught the rest of us something about humanity that we have never forgotten since." "What did they do?" Kieran asked. "They broke into a place they were told, very clearly, not to enter," Orlin said. "They thought the warning was a bluff. They thought humans, still new to galactic society, still unproven, could not possibly mean what they said." He turned to look at Kieran directly. "They were wrong," he said, "and what happened next changed how this entire galaxy sees humanity, forever." Kieran felt a chill run through her. "Will you tell me the whole story?" Orlin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I think it is time someone your age understood it. Sit down. This will take a while." Orlin Thass settled deeper into his seat in the garden. Kieran waited, not wanting to rush him. The old council member looked tired, but there was also a kind of relief in his face, as if he had been waiting a long time for someone to ask him this question. 90 years ago, he began, humanity had only been part of the Galactic Council for a little over 10 years. They were new, small. Their fleet was modest compared to the larger powers. Many species did not take them seriously. Some thought they were lucky to have even been invited to join the council at all. Kieran nodded. She knew this part of history. Humans had been considered a minor species when they first arrived on the galactic stage. Interesting, perhaps, but not important. At that time, Orlin continued, there was a species called the Kryvex. Proud people, strong military. They controlled a large stretch of territory near the edge of human space. They were not cruel, not exactly, but they believed strength was the only thing that mattered, and they did not think humans had much strength at all. "What happened?" Kieran asked. "Humans had built a research site," Orlin said. "A quiet place, far from any major world. It studied something dangerous. I do not know all the details, even now, but I know this. The humans marked the site as fully restricted. No entry, they said. Not without direct authorization from human command. They repeated this warning many times, to many species, including the Kryvex. And the Kryvex ignored it. They did more than ignore it," Orlin said. "They believed the humans were hiding something valuable, weapons perhaps, or technology they wanted for themselves. So the Kryvex sent a fleet, a small one, believing humans would not dare respond with force against a stronger power. They thought it was an empty warning, a bluff from a weak species trying to sound tough." Kieran leaned forward. "Were they wrong?" Orlin's eyes grew distant, as if he were looking at something far away in time. "They were very wrong," he said quietly. He continued the story, and as he spoke, the events of that day unfolded in Kieran's mind, almost like she was there. 90 years earlier, a young human officer named Marcus Holt stood on the command deck of a defense station orbiting the restricted research site. He was not in charge of the whole operation, but he was in charge of the outer perimeter, and it was his job to watch for anything unusual. The alert came in the middle of the night cycle. Ships approaching. Kryvex ships. Not one or two, but a full strike group, moving fast toward the restricted zone. Marcus contacted the Kryvex fleet immediately, following protocol exactly as he had been trained. "This is restricted human territory," he said. "You do not have authorization to enter. Turn back now." The response came back cold and mocking. The Kryvex commander did not believe the threat was real. He told Marcus that humans had no right to claim this much space for themselves, and that if there was something valuable inside, it belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. Marcus repeated the warning. Twice more. Each time, the answer was the same. The Kryvex fleet kept advancing. Marcus was young, only 28 years old, but he understood something that many people did not yet understand about humanity's approach to defense. Humans did not make threats they were not prepared to carry out. If the warning was given and ignored, there would be consequences, not out of anger, not out of hatred, simply because a warning that means nothing is worse than no warning at all. He sent one final message to command, informing them the Kryvex fleet had ignored 3 warnings and was continuing toward the restricted site. The response came back in seconds, a woman's voice, calm and steady, giving the only order that protocol allowed. Engage defensive measures. Do not let them reach the site. That voice belonged to Elena Voss, the officer in overall command of the station. She was not known for being aggressive. In fact, those who served under her often said she was one of the calmest people they had ever met. But she also believed strongly in one simple rule. If you say something will happen, it must happen, or your word means nothing forever after. What followed was not a long battle. It was fast, precise, and devastating. The humans had spent years designing defenses for this exact situation, expecting that someday someone would test their warnings. When the Kryvex fleet crossed the line, they had been told not to cross. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Automated defense platforms, hidden and quiet until that moment, opened fire with terrible accuracy. The Kryvex ships, confident and unprepared, were disabled and destroyed in a matter of minutes. It was not a massacre. Elena Voss had given clear orders that the goal was to stop the fleet, not to kill every last person aboard. Escape pods were allowed to launch. Survivors were later returned to Kryvex space, unharmed, along with a short message. The message said only this: "You were warned. Next time, believe us." Orlan paused in his story, watching Kieran's face carefully. "That was the entire message," he said. "No threats, no bragging, just a simple statement of fact. And it terrified the Kryvex more than any angry speech could have." "Why?" Kieran asked. "Because it proved something," Orlan said. "It proved that humans did not exaggerate. They did not bluff. When they said a line could not be crossed, they meant it completely, and they had already built the means to enforce it long before anyone tested them. The Kryvex had assumed weakness because humans were new and small. They learned, in the worst possible way, that being new did not mean being unprepared." Kieran sat in silence for a moment, trying to picture it. A young, unproven species, still finding its place among older powers, calmly destroying a fleet that underestimated them, and then returning the survivors without cruelty. No anger, no celebration, just quiet, controlled consequence. "What happened after that?" she asked. "How did this lead to the access laws?" Orlan shifted in his seat, his old joints creaking slightly. "That is the second part of the story," he said. "The Kryvex incident itself was only the beginning. What came after, in the council chambers, is what truly changed everything." He looked up at the darkening sky above the garden, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "The council held an emergency session within days," he said. "Many species were afraid. They thought humanity might be dangerous, unpredictable, something to be feared and controlled. Others saw something different in what had happened. They saw restraint. They saw a species that could have done far worse, and chose not to." "Which side won?" Kieran asked. Orlan smiled faintly, the first real smile she had seen from him. "That," he said, "is a story worth telling properly. Come back tomorrow, and I will tell you what happened inside those chambers." It was not a simple decision. Many species argued for hours, but in the end, the vote that followed created the very law you found in the archive. Kieran nodded slowly, her mind full of questions, but she could see the old council member was growing tired. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me this." "Do not thank me yet," Orlan said. "The hardest part of the story is still to come. What the council decided that day was not simple, and not everyone agreed with it. Some still do not agree with it, even now, 90 years later." He rose slowly from his seat, leaning on a cane Kieran had not noticed before. "Tomorrow," he said. "Same time. I will tell you about the vote that changed the law for every restricted place in this galaxy." Kieran watched him go, her thoughts spinning. She had come looking for a simple answer to a strange rule in old records. Instead, she had found a story of war, restraint, and a young species that had earned something no one expected them to earn so quickly. She looked up at the darkening sky, thinking of Daniel Reyes, and the quiet way he had spoken about all of this. "It's not really mine to tell," he had said. Now she understood why. This was not just history. This was something humans still carried with them, quietly, every day. She could not wait to hear the rest. Kieran returned to the garden the next evening, exactly on time. Orlan Thass was already there, sitting in the same spot, looking out over the quiet plants as if he had never left. "You came back," he said, without turning his head. "I said I would," Kieran replied, taking her seat. Orlan nodded slowly. "Good. Then let me tell you about the vote." He folded his hands in his lap and began. 3 days after the Kryvex incident, the full Galactic Council gathered for an emergency session. Every major species sent a representative. Even minor ones sent observers. No one wanted to miss this. A young, unproven species had just destroyed a Kryvex strike fleet in minutes, using defenses no one even knew existed. People were frightened. People were curious. Some were angry. It was, without question, the most tense meeting I attended in my entire career. "Was humanity there too?" Kieran asked. "They sent one representative," Orlan said. "A young diplomat. Calm, quiet, almost unnervingly so, given the circumstances. She sat through hours of accusations and arguments without raising her voice once." Kieran leaned forward. "What did the other species say?" "Many things," Orlan said. "Some demanded punishment. They said humans had used excessive force, that a fleet should not have been destroyed so completely, so quickly, with technology no one had been told about. They called it reckless, dangerous. They said humanity could not be trusted with such hidden capability." "That seems fair, in a way," Kieran admitted. "It seemed fair to many of us at the time," Orlan agreed. But others in the chamber saw it differently. They pointed out that the Kryvex had been warned 4 separate times, not once. 4 times, clearly, with no room for misunderstanding. They pointed out that human forces had allowed survivors to escape, when they easily could have destroyed every ship completely. And they pointed out something else, something that made the whole chamber go quiet when it was said aloud. What was that? That humanity had never once used this hidden defensive technology against anyone who did not attack them first, Orlan said. Investigators searched human records extensively in the following weeks. They found no history of humans forcing their way into anyone else's restricted territory, not once. Every restricted zone humans controlled, they defended. But they never violated anyone else's boundaries themselves. The power was real, and it was significant. But it had only ever been used to protect, never to conquer. Kieran considered this. So the fear was not really about what humans had done, it was about what they might do. Exactly, Orlan said, seeming pleased that she understood. And that is where the debate truly began. One side argued that a species capable of this much hidden strength needed to be watched closely, restricted, perhaps even limited in what technology they were permitted to develop further. The other side argued the opposite. They said a species that had shown this much restraint, even after being tested and provoked, was exactly the kind of species that deserved more trust, not less. Who argued that second position? Orlan smiled faintly. An old Threll elder, if you can believe it. One of the most conservative voices on the council at that time. He stood up during the debate and said something I have never forgotten. He said, "We have spent decades fearing species that show us their strength. Perhaps we should pay closer attention to the ones who hide it, and only use it when they have no other choice." Kieran sat back, absorbing that thought. The human diplomat spoke only once during the entire session, Orlan continued. Near the end, after hours of arguing back and forth, she stood, and she said that humanity had not come to the council asking for special treatment, and did not intend to start now. She said if the council wished to restrict human technology, they were welcome to try, but that humanity would always defend what belonged to them, exactly as they had defended that research site. She also said something else, something that shifted the entire mood of the room. What did she say? She said humanity did not want power over anyone else's territory. They had never asked to enter Kryvex space, or Threll space, or anyone else's. They only asked that their own boundaries be respected, the same as everyone else's boundaries were respected. And she said that if the Council trusted that humanity meant what it said about its own restricted areas, then perhaps that trust could be extended both ways. Orlan paused, letting the words settle. It was a simple statement, he said, but it landed heavily, because by that point, every species in that room understood one thing clearly. Humans had proven, through action rather than words, that when they made a promise about their own boundaries, they kept it exactly, without exaggeration, and without failure. There was something almost comforting about that kind of consistency, even for those who feared human strength. So what happened with the vote? Kieran asked. It took 2 more days of discussion, Orlan said, but eventually, a proposal was put forward, and it was unusual. Instead of restricting humanity further, the Council proposed extending a new kind of trust to them. The idea was this: if humanity had proven, beyond doubt, that they respected boundaries and only used force in clear, justified defense, then perhaps humanity could be trusted to enter any restricted area in the galaxy without needing special authorization first, because they had already shown they would not misuse that access. Kieran blinked. That seems like a strange reward for a battle. It was not meant as a reward, Orlan said gently. It was meant as a statement of trust. The thinking was this: every other species needed authorization rules because history had shown, again and again, that access without oversight could be abused. But humanity had just demonstrated, in the clearest way possible, that they did not need that oversight. They enforced their own rules on themselves, strictly, even when no one was watching. The Council decided that a species like that did not need to be limited. It needed to be trusted. Did everyone agree? Orlan shook his head slowly. No, the vote was close. Very close. Many species still worried it was too soon to extend such trust to someone so new to galactic society. But in the end, the proposal passed, by a narrow margin. And from that day forward, the rule was written into every restricted zone record across Council space. Humans do not require authorization to enter. Kieran sat quietly for a long moment, trying to take in everything she had just learned. It was so different from what she had expected. She had assumed the rule might be some old alliance, some favor traded between powerful governments. Instead, it was the result of a single test, one where humanity had shown exactly who they were, and the galaxy had chosen to believe what it saw. Did the Kryvex ever recover from this? She asked. In time, yes, Orlan said. They rebuilt their fleet. Their pride took longer to heal than their ships did. But interestingly, the Kryvex became one of humanity's more careful allies in later years. Nothing builds respect quite like being on the losing end of a lesson you deserve to learn. Kieran let out a small, surprised laugh, and Orlan smiled again. There is one more part to this story, he said. The part that happened after the vote, when humanity had to decide how to carry this new trust. Power like that can change a species, Kieran. It has changed many species before, usually for the worse. Come back once more, and I will tell you what humanity did with it, and why, 90 years later, that trust has never once been broken. Kieran nodded eagerly. I'll be here. The garden was quieter than usual the next evening. A light rain had passed earlier, and the leaves still held small drops of water that caught the last light of the sky. Orlan Thass was already seated when Kieran arrived, his cane resting against the bench beside him. You look tired, Kieran said, sitting down. I am old, Orlan said simply, but this is a story worth finishing, even for tired bones. Where did we leave off? The vote had just passed, Kieran said. The Council decided to trust humanity with access to every restricted zone. You said there was more. About what happened after. Yes, Orlan said. The vote was only the beginning. A law on paper is easy to write. Living up to it, for 90 years, without a single failure, is much harder. That is the part of this story that people forget to ask about. They hear of the battle, the vote, and they think the story ends there. It does not. He shifted on the bench, gathering his thoughts. In the years right after the vote, he said, many species watched humanity very closely. They expected mistakes. Some expected humanity to grow arrogant, to start using this new freedom carelessly, entering places out of curiosity rather than necessity. A few even expected humans to eventually push the boundaries of the trust they had been given, testing how far they could go before someone stopped them. This is, after all, what many species had done before, once given power without oversight. Did that happen? Kieran asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. No, Orlan said. And that is the truly remarkable part. Humans barely used the privilege at all. In the first 10 years after the law was passed, there is record of humans entering unauthorized restricted zones only a handful of times, and every single instance was tied to a genuine emergency. A ship in distress, near a sealed military zone. A rescue operation inside a restricted research facility after an accident. A diplomatic crisis where quick access prevented a larger conflict from breaking out. Humans did not treat the privilege as a right to explore. They treated it as a responsibility, something to be used only when truly needed. Kieran considered this. That seems very disciplined. It was, Orlan agreed, and it made an impression on everyone watching. Species who had expected humanity to grow proud or careless instead saw them behave almost cautiously, as though they understood that trust, once given, could just as easily be taken away if it was misused even once. Marcus Holt, the young officer who first raised the alarm during the Kryvex incident, rose through the ranks in those years. He became known for a simple saying that spread through human forces and eventually beyond them. What did he say? He said, "The door being open is not an invitation to walk through it." It became something of an unofficial motto among human defense forces for years afterward. The idea took hold deeply. Access was not permission to intrude. It was only a tool, meant to be used carefully, and only when circumstances truly required it. Kieran nodded slowly. So humanity earned the trust, and then spent decades proving it was not a mistake. Precisely, Orlan said. There was one moment, though, about 30 years after the original vote, that tested this trust more seriously than anything since the Kryvex incident itself. I think this is the part of the story you should hear most closely, because it shows why the rule has never once been questioned again. Kieran straightened, listening closely. There was a species called the Desic, Orlan said. A proud, insular people, much like the Kryvex had once been, though less openly aggressive. They controlled a heavily restricted sector near the Galactic core, a place few outsiders were ever permitted to enter. When they learned of humanity's unusual access rights, they were deeply offended. They saw it as an insult, a suggestion that their own security could be bypassed by outsiders whenever humans pleased. They lodged a formal complaint with the Council, demanding the rule be reconsidered. Did the Council listen? They agreed to review it, Orlan said. It caused quite a stir at the time. Many wondered if the old law, born from a single battle decades earlier, was still relevant. Perhaps it had been a reaction to one moment in history, not a lasting truth about humanity's character. The review board decided to test the question directly. They asked the Desic a simple question. In the years since the law had existed, had humans ever entered Desic restricted space without permission? For any reason at all? Kieran already suspected the answer. They hadn't. They had not, Orlan confirmed. Not once, in 30 years, despite having full legal right to do so at any time. The Desic had to admit this publicly, in front of the entire council. It was, in its own quiet way, a very powerful piece of evidence. Humanity held a key to every locked door in the galaxy, and in 30 years, they had never once opened a single one without good reason. What happened to the complaint? It was withdrawn, Orlan said, quietly, and rather awkwardly, by the Desic representative. And oddly enough, this incident had the opposite effect of what the Desic intended. Rather than weakening the law, it strengthened it. Other species, who had perhaps quietly held their own doubts, saw undeniable proof that the trust placed in humanity, all those years earlier, had never wavered, not even slightly. If anything, the review made the law feel more permanent than ever. Orlan paused, looking up at the darkening sky. There is something else worth knowing, he said. During that same review, investigators asked Human Command directly why they had shown such restraint for 30 full years, when nothing legally stopped them from acting differently. The answer they received became well known afterward, quietly repeated in diplomatic circles for years. What was it? Elena Voss, the same officer who had given the order during the Kryvex incident, was quite senior by that point. She was asked to respond to the Desic complaint directly. She said something simple. She said, "We were given this trust because we proved we did not need to be watched. If we start acting like we need to be watched, we prove we never deserved it in the first place." That statement was recorded in the council archives. I believe it is still quoted today, in training materials for young human officers. Kieran sat with that thought for a long moment. It was a simple idea, but a powerful one. Trust was not something to be spent. It was something to be maintained, continuously, through restraint rather than through use. "So the law has never been challenged since?" she asked. "Not seriously," Orlan said. "There have been quiet murmurs here and there, especially from newer species joining the council who do not know the full history. But whenever the question is raised, the same answer is always given. Look at the record. 90 years, and not a single misuse. No other species in this galaxy has managed a record that clean, on any law, for any span of time that long. Humanity did not just earn this trust once. They have spent 9 decades proving it was earned correctly." Kieran looked down at her hands, thinking about Daniel Reyes, and the calm, almost humble way he had spoken about all of this. It made much more sense to her now. He was not being secretive out of pride. He was being quiet because, to him, this was simply how things were supposed to work. Not a badge of honor to display, but a responsibility to carry silently. "I think I understand now," Kieran said. "This was never really about the battle at all. The battle only proved they were strong enough to be dangerous. What mattered after that was that they chose not to be." Orlan smiled, a slow, tired, satisfied smile. "You understand it exactly right," he said. "Power impresses people for a moment. Restraint earns their trust for a lifetime. This entire galaxy learned that lesson from a fairly young, fairly small species, who did not ask to be trusted. They simply behaved, consistently, in a way that made trust the only reasonable conclusion." He rose slowly from the bench, using his cane for support. "You wanted to know why the law exists," he said. "Now you know the whole truth of it. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. But I suspect, given how carefully you have listened tonight, you already understand it is not the kind of story that belongs only in old archive records. It deserves to be remembered properly." Kieran nodded, watching the old council member walk slowly toward the garden's exit, his footsteps quiet against the stone path. She sat there a while longer after he left, thinking about everything she had learned. A battle fought with restraint. A vote built on trust rather than fear. 90 years without a single failure. And somewhere in the council building, right now, a quiet human diplomat who had simply said, "That's a long story," rather than boast about any of it. She thought she finally understood why. Kieran did not go back to her regular work the next morning. She sat in her small office in the archive, staring at the same law she had first noticed nearly 2 weeks earlier. "Humans do not require authorization to enter restricted zones." The words looked completely different to her now. What had once seemed strange and unfair now felt like the ending line of a very long story, one written not in bold letters, but in 90 years of quiet, careful behavior. She thought about Orlan Thass, tired and old, telling her about a battle fought with precision and restraint. She thought about the vote in the council chamber, close and uncertain, decided in the end by a simple question of trust. She thought about the Desic complaint 30 years later, and how it had only proven the law was stronger than ever. And she thought about Elena Voss's words, still quoted in training materials after all these years. "If we start acting like we need to be watched, we prove we never deserved it in the first place." It was a heavy thought for such a short sentence. She decided there was one more person she wanted to speak to before she considered this matter finished. She left the archive and walked toward the council building, hoping to find Daniel Reyes again. She found him in the same place as before, in the main hall, though this time, he was not reading anything. He was simply standing near a large window, looking out over the city below, his hands resting loosely at his sides. "Kieran," he said, turning as she approached. "You look like someone who has been busy." "I talked to Orlan Thass," she said. 3 times, actually. He told me everything. The Kryvex incident, the vote, the Desic complaint, all of it." Daniel's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw something that looked like quiet respect in his eyes. "That's not a small thing," he said. "Orlan doesn't tell that story to just anyone. He said it was time someone my age understood it properly," Kieran said. Why didn't you just tell me yourself? That first day, Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. Because it's not really my story to tell, he said. Not the way Orlan can tell it anyway. He watched it happen. He argued about it in that chamber. It means something different coming from someone who lived through the fear and the doubt, rather than someone like me, who was just born into the result of it. Kieran nodded slowly, understanding. He said something else too. He said this was never really about the battle. It was about what came after. 90 years of never misusing the trust you were given. That sounds like Orlan, Daniel said, a small smile appearing. He always did care more about the follow-through than the fireworks. Is it hard? Kieran asked. Carrying that, I mean. Knowing you could walk into any restricted place in the galaxy, and choosing not to, every single day? Daniel thought about the question seriously before answering. I don't think most of us think about it as carrying something heavy, he said. It's more like a habit, passed down. Marcus Holt used to say, the door being open isn't an invitation to walk through it. I think that idea just became part of who we are, over time. Nobody wakes up thinking about the weight of 90 years of trust. We just try to do the right thing, the same way people before us did, and eventually that adds up to something bigger than any one person. Kieran looked out the window with him, watching the traffic of ships moving quietly across the evening sky. Can I ask you something else, she said. Go ahead. Do you think it will ever change? The law, I mean. Do you think someday humans might misuse it, and lose this trust? Daniel considered this for a long moment. Trust like this isn't kept by an agreement in a council record. It's kept by choice, over and over, every single day, by people who remember why it matters. Kieran smiled slightly. That's very close to what Orlan said. Good, Daniel said. It means the story hasn't changed much in the retelling. They stood together for a while, in comfortable silence, watching the sky. Finally, Kieran spoke again. Thank you, she said, for not just answering my question that first day. If you had just explained it simply, I don't think I would have understood it the way I do now. Some things need the long way around, Daniel said. You wouldn't understand a scar properly if someone just told you it was there. You have to know how it happened. Kieran nodded, thinking of Marcus Holt, young and alone on that command deck, giving warnings that were ignored. She thought of Elena Voss, calm and steady, giving an order she did not want to give, but knew she had to. She thought of the human diplomat, standing quietly in a chamber full of frightened, uncertain voices, asking only that her people's word be trusted. None of them had asked for a reward. They had only asked to be believed, and 90 years later, that belief had never once been broken. I should get back to the archive, Kieran said eventually. I have a report to finish. About access laws, actually. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Going to write down everything Orlan told you? Some of it, Kieran said. I think people should understand why the rule exists, not just that it exists. Daniel nodded approvingly. That sounds like a good use of your time. Kieran turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at him. Can I ask one last thing? Of course. Have you ever used it? She asked. The access. Have you ever walked into a restricted zone without asking first? Daniel thought about this for a moment, then shook his head slowly. Not once, he said. Never needed to. And honestly, I hope I never do. The day I need to use it is probably not going to be a good day for anyone. Kieran smiled at that, understanding completely now. The privilege was never really about walking through open doors. It was about the discipline to leave them closed, unless something truly demanded otherwise. She said goodbye and walked back toward the archive, her mind already forming the words of her report. She would write about the Kryvex incident, and the vote that followed, and the Desic complaint 30 years later. But she thought the most important part of her report would not be about the battle at all. It would be about a quiet human diplomat, decades ago, standing in a frightened council chamber, asking only to be trusted the same as anyone else. And about every human since, who had spent 90 years making sure that trust was never wasted. As Kieran reached the archive doors, she looked up at the restricted section sign above the entrance, the same section she had access to only through her research clearance. She thought about Daniel Reyes, walking past signs just like it every day, holding a key that could open every single one, and choosing, quietly and consistently, not to use it unless it truly mattered. She finally understood why the rule existed. It was never about permission. It was about proof. 90 years of it. carried quietly, one ordinary day at a time.